What would you do if the world forgot your greatest sacrifice? In a society that often ignores the silent heroes among us, this is the story of a man whose courage was buried until one voice, one truth, turned shame into honor. Meet James Carter, an 87-year-old black veteran, stripped of his legacy and mocked by those who should have revered him. But hidden in a forgotten file lies a secret that could rewrite history, a life that once saved a nation's champion. This gripping tale of dignity, betrayal, and redemption will pull you into James's shoes. Will you stand with him as he fights for his truth? Imagine you're James, standing in a cold VA office, clutching your faded papers. What's next? Comment below. 1, if you'd keep fighting for recognition, or 2, if you'd walk away in defeat. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories as we aim for 1,000 subscribers this month. At 8:15 a.m., the glass doors of the Chicago Veterans Affairs office creaked open with a reluctant groan, ushering in a biting wind that sliced through the lobby like a blade. James Carter stepped inside, his gray scarf wrapped tightly around his neck, the coarse wool scratching against his weathered skin. His navy coat, threadbare at the elbows, hung loosely on his frail frame. Once a proud midnight blue, the coat was now a muted gray, faded by years of harsh Chicago winters, each stitch a silent witness to his struggles. In his trembling hands, he held a leather satchel, its edges frayed, the zipper rusted and barely functional. Inside were the fragments of his life. Discharge papers yellowed with age, a photograph of 4 soldiers laughing in a snowy field, their faces frozen in a moment of joy, and a Silver Star citation. The ink so faded it looked like a ghost of its former glory, the words barely legible but heavy with meaning. To the others in the waiting room, James was a ghost, just another elderly man with a shaky step and a tired gaze, his eyes clouded with a mix of hope and resignation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow that made the room feel colder, more unwelcoming. "Sir, grab a number over there," a receptionist barked, her voice sharp and mechanical, her eyes glued to her computer screen as if James were nothing more than a glitch in her system. James nodded silently, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her indifference. He shuffled to the kiosk, his boots scuffing against the tiled floor, each step echoing the exhaustion in his bones. A young man in a leather jacket smirked nearby, his voice dripping with mockery. "Some people don't know when to give up," he whispered to his friend, who chuckled, the sound cutting through James like a shard of glass. James heard the words but kept his head down, his heart sinking like a stone in a frozen lake, the coldness of their disdain seeping into his already weary soul. He took seat number 42, with 15 names ahead of him, each tick of the clock on the wall a reminder of the endless wait, the endless fight. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee, the air thick with the impatience of those around him. Behind the counter, Marcus Reed sipped his latte, the steam curling upward like a mocking wisp of warmth in the frigid room. His gaze swept the room with disinterest, landing on James with a flicker of annoyance. "4th time this week for that guy," he muttered to a co-worker, his voice low but cutting. "Still thinks he's got a claim. Probably just wants a handout." The co-worker, a woman with sharp red nails tapping rhythmically on the counter, shrugged, her lips curling into a dismissive sneer. "He looks like he's been on the street too long. I bet he's just here for a free meal." James sat quietly, his fingers tracing the photograph in his satchel. For young black men in heavy winter gear, their faces lit with youthful hope, their breaths visible in the icy air of a long-ago battlefield. 2 of them never made it back, their laughter now a haunting echo in James's memory, a reminder of the cost of war and the price of survival. Elena Torres, a 28-year-old intern at the intake desk, noticed the satchel, her dark eyes narrowing with curiosity. Her uncle had served in Vietnam, and she recognized the way James held it. Not as a beggar chasing a payout, but as a guardian of memories, each paper a piece of his soul. She leaned forward, her chair creaking softly, her dark eyes studying him with a tenderness the room lacked. James's hands trembled as he adjusted the satchel on his lap, the leather creaking under his touch, a sound that seemed to echo the fragility of his hope. When James's number was called, he stood with effort, his knees creaking like old floorboards under the weight of his years. He approached the counter with a faint smile, placing the satchel down gently, as if it were a sacred relic, his fingers lingering on the leather, as if reluctant to let go of the only proof of his worth. Marcus barely glanced up, his eyes cold and unfeeling, the latte in his hand a stark contrast to the chill in his demeanor. "You again," he groaned, his voice dripping with exasperation. "We've already told you. You're not in the system." James's voice was soft, almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile hope he clung to. "I was just hoping someone might check again." His words hung in the air, fragile and unanswered, the weight of his plea lost on Marcus, who rolled his eyes and turned back to his screen. Elena's brow furrowed, her heart twisting at the sight of James's quiet dignity in the face of such dismissal. Something felt wrong, deeply, profoundly wrong. Deep within the satchel, beneath the brittle papers, a truth lay dormant, waiting to be unearthed, its whispers of heroism buried under layers of bureaucratic neglect. When James returned the next day, the VA office felt colder than the icy streets outside, the chill seeping through the cracks in the doors and settling into his bones. He gripped the same satchel, his steps slower, weighed down by a heaviness that wasn't just physical but emotional, a heaviness born of repeated rejection, of being unseen, unheard. He'd promised his late wife, Clara, he'd never stop trying, her voice echoing in his mind like a beacon in the dark. "You deserve to be remembered, James. Don't let them take that from you." Last night, he'd found a faded letter signed by a commanding officer, a potential key to his lost record, its ink smudged, but its promise clear. Marcus set down his energy drink with a clunk, the sound jarring in the quiet lobby. "Back again," he sneered, his voice a blade of contempt. "Some people never learn." The words stung, each syllable a reminder of James's invisibility, but he squared his shoulders, drawing on a reservoir of strength forged in the fires of war. From the corner, a group of younger veterans snickered, their laughter a cruel soundtrack to James's struggle. One in a black hoodie elbowed his friend, his voice loud enough for James to hear, each word a deliberate wound. "He probably thinks he's still a war hero. Look at him, acting like he matters." James turned his head slightly, his gray eyes meeting theirs for a fleeting moment, but he said nothing, his chest tightening with a familiar ache, the ache of being dismissed, of being reduced to a punchline. The memory of Key-Sand Valley flashed unbidden in his mind. The biting cold, the screams of his comrades, the weight of Henry Red Jackson's body as he dragged him through the snow, bullets whizzing past like deadly hornets. He'd been a hero then, but now he was nothing to them. He pressed the kiosk screen with weathered fingers, the machine beeping as it dispensed number 49, the number feeling like a cruel joke. Another hurdle in a race he was too tired to run. He sat near the end of the row, the hum of the room fading into a distant buzz, the world around him blurring as he retreated into his thoughts. A child played on a tablet nearby, the bright screen a stark contrast to the dull gray of James's coat, the laughter of the child a painful reminder of the joy he'd once known with his own children, now grown and distant. Elena's gaze stayed on James, her heart aching at the sight of his hunched shoulders, the way he seemed to shrink into himself with each passing minute. He opened his satchel, pulling out a water-stained certificate, its edges curling with age. She squinted to read it. Carter, James L., 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, Key-Sand Valley. Her fingers flew across her keyboard. No match in the system, but the name stirred a memory, a story her uncle had once told her about the heroes of Key-Sand, men who fought against impossible odds and came back changed, if they came back at all. She vowed to dig deeper, her resolve hardening like steel. Number 49 flashed on the screen, the red digits a harsh contrast to the muted tones of the lobby. James shuffled forward, his cane tapping softly against the floor, each step a battle against the pain in his joints and the weight in his heart. This time, he faced a new staffer, Lila, who waved him over impatiently, her movements sharp and hurried, as if James were an inconvenience she couldn't wait to be rid of. "Let's make this quick. Claim number." Her voice was clipped, her eyes darting to the clock on the wall, a silent reminder of the ticking deadline she was under to clear the backlog of claims before the day's end. "I don't have one," James said softly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the office. "Just these records. If someone could." Lila cut him off, her patience fraying like a worn thread. "No claim, no help. You'll need to get these certified by your unit's officer." James hesitated, his mind racing back to the faces of his comrades. All gone, their voices silenced by time and war. "They're all gone," he whispered, the words heavy with loss. Lila shrugged, her expression indifferent. "Then file an appeal." "Next window." "But I've already—" James began, his voice trembling with desperation, but Lila cut him off again, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "Sir, don't hold up the line." Her voice echoed through the lobby, a public shaming that made James's cheeks burn with humiliation. He lowered his head, the shame searing through him like a wildfire, his hands clutching the satchel as if it could shield him from the judgment of the room. As he passed the waiting area, a young veteran muttered, "Better luck next time, old man," his voice dripping with sarcasm. Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. "That's enough." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her, the air thick with anticipation. She glared at Marcus, her dark eyes blazing with a fire that belied her quiet demeanor. "Maybe he's not the one wasting our time." James paused, his satchel trembling in his hands. Not from age, but from a deep, unspoken wound, a wound that had festered for decades, a wound that Elena's words began to heal, if only slightly. That night, the wind howled outside James Carter's small apartment, rattling the windows like a mournful cry, the sound a haunting echo of the artillery fire that had once filled his nights in Keysan. Inside, a dim lamp cast shadows on the walls, the flickering light dancing across the peeling wallpaper, the only sound the hum of a space heater battling the cold that seeped through the cracks. James sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress sagging under his weight, the satchel open on his lap, its contents spread out like relics of a forgotten era. A pair of dog tags gleamed faintly, their metal scratched and tarnished, resting beside a photo of 4 Marines in a snowy field, their breaths visible in the freezing air, their faces alight with a camaraderie that war would soon shatter. James, in the center, smiled faintly, as if he knew the moment was fleeting, a rare moment of peace in a world of chaos. His finger traced the image, lingering on the faces of his fallen brothers. The man on the left, Henry Red Jackson, had been his closest friend, killed by a sniper in the Keysan Valley. His laughter silenced forever as James held his hand, the snow around them stained crimson. The other two, Corporal Marcus Evans and Private Leon Tate, died in a mortar attack James barely survived, their screams haunting his dreams for decades. He was the only one who came home, the weight of their deaths a burden he carried alone. He lifted the Silver Star citation, the words etched in his memory, for extraordinary heroism in combat against an armed enemy. The citation felt heavy in his hands, a tangible reminder of the sacrifice no one at the VA had cared to acknowledge. He closed his eyes, the memory of that night in Keysan washing over him like a wave. The biting cold, the acrid smell of gunpowder, the weight of Red's body as he dragged him through the snow, the sound of bullets whizzing past, each one a whisper of death. He'd been terrified, his heart pounding in his chest, but he'd kept going, driven by a promise to never leave a man behind. James's gaze drifted to a shelf across the room. A photo of Clara, her smile frozen in time, a folded flag in a wooden case, its stars faded but still proud, and a chipped mug that read Keysan survivors. "They don't know," he whispered, his voice breaking, the words a plea to the empty room. "They think I'm just a fraud." He wasn't after money. Never had been. He wanted his service record corrected so he could be buried in a military cemetery, so he wouldn't die erased, a nameless man in a world that had forgotten him. The thought of dying without recognition, of leaving no legacy for his children to hold on to, was a fear that gnawed at him, a fear that kept him coming back to the VA despite the rejection, despite the shame. Across town, Elena sat at her desk, her laptop glowing in the dark, the blue light casting shadows on her face as she typed James Carter, USMC, Sand Valley into a Veterans Archive database, her fingers trembling with a mix of exhaustion and determination. A single result appeared, a grainy 1968 newsletter, its text faded but legible. She zoomed in, her heart racing as she read the words that confirmed James's story. Sergeant James Carter of Chicago is credited with dragging 3 wounded Marines to safety under heavy enemy fire in Sand Valley. Facing sub-zero conditions, Carter refused evacuation until all were secure. 2 later died. The third, Lieutenant Raymond Holt, survived with severe injuries, his name a legend in military circles. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat, the weight of the discovery settling over her like a heavy cloak. Raymond Holt, now General Raymond Holt, a decorated war hero, still alive in Michigan. The man James saved was a legend, and he'd been sitting in her lobby, mocked for his faded coat, dismissed as a nuisance. James's satchel wasn't just a collection of papers. It was proof he was somebody, proof that his life had mattered, that his sacrifices had saved a man who would go on to shape history. Elena leaned back in her chair, her mind racing, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the determination in her eyes. She thought of her uncle, of the stories he'd told her about the men who fought in Vietnam, men who came back broken but proud, men who deserved better than to be forgotten. She thought of James, of the quiet dignity in his eyes, the way he'd held his satchel like a lifeline, and she knew she couldn't let this go. Across town, James sat in the dark, the space heater's hum a faint comfort against the cold, his hands resting on the satchel, unaware that his story was about to resurface, that a young woman he'd never truly met was fighting for him in a way he'd never been fought for before. By Friday morning, James stood outside the VA office again, the wind biting at his face, tugging at the collar of his coat with icy fingers. The city roared around him, cars honking, pedestrians rushing past, their faces blurred in their hurry, indifferent to the old man standing alone. He clutched his satchel like a lifeline, its weight a reminder of the fight he couldn't abandon, a fight that had become as much a part of him as the scars on his body. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken resentment. Elena's outburst the day before had stirred whispers among the staff, some admiring her courage, others resenting her for rocking the boat. Marcus, however, was livid, his voice sharp as he muttered to a coworker, "Back again? Doesn't he ever quit?" His words were a venomous hiss, a reflection of his growing frustration with James, a man he saw as a thorn in his side, a problem that wouldn't go away. James stepped inside as the doors unlocked, the familiar buzz of the office greeting him like an old enemy. "Here we go again," Marcus scoffed, shaking his head, his eyes narrowing as he watched James approach. Elena froze at her station, then stood, her pulse quickening, a mix of fear and determination coursing through her veins. James handed his satchel to Lila, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I think there's a missing citation," Lila interrupted, her tone sharp, her patience worn thin by the pressure of the day's workload and the looming deadline for processing claims. "Sir, wait here." She took the satchel to Marcus, who flipped through it with a sneer, his movements exaggerated, as if the act of touching the papers was beneath him. "Same old junk. No verified ID. Probably forged," he muttered, slamming it shut with a force that made the papers inside crinkle in protest. "Mr. Carter," Marcus said loudly, his voice carrying across the lobby like a judge's gavel, "you're not in our database. You're not a recognized veteran. If you keep coming back without proper documentation, I'll report you for fraud." The word fraud echoed through the room, a dagger to James's heart, each syllable a blow that threatened to shatter the fragile hope he'd clung to for so long. His hands shook, his voice barely a whisper as he tried to respond, the weight of the accusation crushing him. "I'm sorry. There isn't." Marcus snapped, his tone final, unyielding. "Security, escort him out." The guard hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty, a flicker of humanity in the face of Marcus's coldness. "He hasn't done anything," the guard said softly, his voice a quiet protest. "It's policy." Marcus barked, his patience gone, his authority a shield against any dissent. Elena stepped forward, her heart pounding, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Wait," she called, her voice trembling but firm, cutting through the tension like a beacon in the dark. Marcus glared at her, his eyes narrowing, a storm brewing behind them. "You want to lose your job over this?" His words were a threat, a challenge, but Elena stood her ground, her resolve unyielding. "No," she said, her voice steady now, a fire burning in her chest, "but I won't lose my soul." She turned to James, her dark eyes softening with compassion. "Sir, may I have your satchel?" James handed it over, his eyes clouded with uncertainty, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Elena held it like a treasure, her fingers brushing against the worn leather with a reverence that spoke of her commitment to his cause. "I'll look into it myself," she promised, her voice a lifeline in the storm of rejection that had surrounded James for so long. James stepped outside, the wind stinging his face, tears welling not from the cold, but from decades of dismissal, each rejection a wound that had never healed. The city buzzed around him, indifferent to his pain, the sounds of traffic and chatter a cruel contrast to the silence in his heart. Yet Elena's voice, steady, kind, gave him a flicker of hope, a small flame in the darkness that threatened to consume him. In the basement of the Chicago Veterans History Center, Elena scrolled through microfilm, her eyes burning from exhaustion, her fingers trembling from too much coffee and too little sleep. She'd spent nights haunted by James's quiet dignity, the way he'd stood there alone but not defeated, the way his hands had trembled not from age but from the weight of his story. The deadline for James's appeal loomed like a storm cloud, each passing hour a reminder of the stakes, a ticking clock that drove her to dig deeper, to fight harder. The name Raymond Holt had stuck with her, a name that carried the weight of history, a name she couldn't ignore. A quick search confirmed he was General Raymond Holt, a Silver Star recipient, now living in Michigan, his legacy a testament to the sacrifices of men like James. She sent an email, her fingers trembling as she typed, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Subject: a name from Key San, James Carter. "Dear General Holt, I'm reaching out from the Chicago VA. A veteran named James Carter claims he served at Key San Valley. I found a 1968 newsletter stating he saved your life. Is this true? He's been denied recognition. Any help would be appreciated." She hit send, her heart pounding, the silence that followed a heavy weight, each second stretching into eternity as she waited for a response that could change everything. While waiting, Elena requested physical record from the National Archives, a daunting task with a looming deadline for James's appeal, the clock ticking down with relentless precision. Each phone call was a battle, each request met with bureaucratic resistance, but she pushed forward, driven by a sense of duty, a need to right the wrong that had been done to James. A clerk on the phone sighed, his voice heavy with the weight of history. Those Key San boys were unbreakable. Hours later, Elena found a sealed envelope, its edges yellowed with age, the words Unit Record, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines stamped across the front in faded ink. Inside, a handwritten report from 1967. Sergeant James Carter refused medevac, carried Lieutenant Holt and 2 others to safety under enemy fire. Temperatures at -20 degrees Fahrenheit. 2 died. Elte Holt survivet. The words leapt off the page, a testament to James's heroism, a truth that had been buried for too long. Elena's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the discovery settling over her like a heavy cloak. It was real and extraordinary, a story of courage that deserved to be told, a story that could change everything for James. She emailed the document to her supervisor, the regional VA director, and, after a moment's hesitation, to Marcus, the image a silent challenge to his indifference. At 11:15 p.m., her phone buzzed, the sound a jolt in the quiet of her apartment. General Holt's reply: "Yes, James Carter saved my life. I thought he died in combat. Please send his location. I owe him everything." Elena stared at the screen, her heart pounding, tears welling in her eyes as the weight of the moment settled over her. A moment of triumph in a battle she hadn't realized she'd been fighting. The next morning, the Chicago VA regional office phone rang, the sound cutting through the hum of the office like a siren. Marcus was sipping coffee, the bitter taste a sharp contrast to the sweetness of his morning routine, when the receptionist knocked, her voice trembling with urgency. "Line 1, urgent. It's General Raymond Holt." Marcus froze, his hand tightening around the mug, the name sending a shiver down his spine. He picked up the receiver, his voice unsteady. "Mr. Reed," Holt's voice boomed, deep and commanding, a voice that carried the weight of authority and history. "I'm calling about Sergeant James Carter. He was in your office this week, 3 times. Marcus stammered, his mind racing. "Yes, sir, but we found no record." "Your system is broken," Holt snapped, his words a bullet that pierced through Marcus's defenses. "Carter saved my life at Key San. I've confirmed the records. I've escalated this to the Office of Military Records," Holt continued, his voice unyielding, a force that brooked no argument. "Carter's citation will be reinstated, and I expect an apology issued today." Marcus felt sweat trickle down his neck, the weight of his actions crashing down on him like a tidal wave, his indifference now a crime he couldn't escape. "Yes, sir," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "And, Mr. Reed," Holt added, his tone a warning, "rethink how you treat those who walk through your doors. You never know who they've saved." The line went dead, the silence that followed a deafening condemnation of Marcus's actions. He stared at the satchel on his desk, unopened, the weight of his shame a heavy burden he could no longer ignore. Across town, James sat on his porch, wrapped in his old Marine jacket, the fabric worn but warm, a reminder of the battles he'd fought and the men he'd lost. He sipped coffee from his Key San survivor's mug, the bitter taste of comfort in the chill of the morning, the steam curling upward like a prayer. A car pulled up, the sound of gravel crunching under tires breaking the silence of the morning. Elena stepped out, dressed in a simple sweater, her hair pulled back, carrying James's satchel, now heavier, its contents a testament to the truth she'd uncovered. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly, her voice a gentle contrast to the harshness of the world around them. James stood, curious, his heart lifting at the sight of her, a flicker of hope stirring in his chest. "Not at all," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. She handed him the satchel, now filled with official documents, service verification, reissued medals, and a letter of apology from the VA, each page a validation of his life, his sacrifice. James read aloud, his voice trembling, "Sergeant James L. Carter, confirmed veteran, United States Marine Corps." He looked at Elena, tears in his eyes, the weight of 50 years lifting from his shoulders. "Ow?" he asked, his voice breaking with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. She smiled, her own eyes misty, a quiet pride shining through her exhaustion. "You were never forgotten. Someone just had to fight for you." James sat down, clutching the papers, the fight that had defined his life finally over. He felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of peace he hadn't known in decades, a peace born of being seen, of being remembered. 2 weeks later, the Chicago VA lobby gleamed with a new energy, the marble floors polished to a mirror-like shine, the air buzzing with anticipation. A podium stood in the Hall of Valor, where portraits of honored veterans lined the walls, their faces a testament to the sacrifices that had shaped a nation. Cameras crowded the space, capturing a historic moment. A new name was being added to the legacy of heroes. James Carter stood to the side, his navy coat freshly cleaned, its faded gray now a badge of honor, his silver star pinned proudly to his chest, its gleam a quiet defiance against the years of neglect. Elena stood beside him, her quiet pride radiant, her simple dress a contrast to the grandeur of the moment, her presence a reminder of the power of the crowd hushed as General Raymond Holt stepped forward, his silver hair catching the light, his cane tapping with purpose against the polished floor, each step a testament to the years he'd carried the weight of his own survival. Holt turned to James and saluted, his voice breaking with emotion, the sound echoing through the silent room. I stand here today because this man refused to leave me behind. He ran into danger when others fled. For 50 years, his story was buried, but no longer. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound a wave of recognition that washed over James, filling the empty spaces in his heart. A plaque was unveiled, its bronze surface gleaming under the lights. Sergeant James L. Carter, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, hero of Key Sand Valley. He carried us all. James stared, disbelief melting into quiet pride, the weight of his journey settling into a newfound peace. Marcus stood in the back, silent, his arms folded, his face unreadable, the shame of his actions a heavy burden he couldn't escape. A young girl in a scout uniform saluted James, her small hand trembling with the weight of the gesture, her eyes wide with admiration. James returned the salute with a gentle nod, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, the past, once erased, now standing tall, not in anger, but in honor. James returned to the VA every Thursday, sitting across from his plaque, not for glory, but to remember, to feel the warmth of recognition that had eluded him for so long. A father and son paused at the plaque one morning, the boy's small finger tracing the inscription. "Dad, what does it mean he carried us all?" the boy asked, his voice curious, his eyes bright with wonder. "It means one man's courage can lift us all," the father replied, glancing at James with a quiet respect. "Were you scared?" the boy asked James, his voice small but earnest. "Terrified," James chuckled, his voice warm with the wisdom of years. "But I did it anyway." Elena joined him that day, bringing coffee, the steam curling upward like a shared memory between them. "Your story's now part of the educational tour," she said, her voice soft but proud. James nodded, his gaze drifting to the plaque, the bronze catching the morning light. "Maybe it'll teach someone to look deeper," he said, his voice steady, a quiet hope threading through his words. Daily Narrated Stories is proud to share tales like James's, stories of resilience, hope, and redemption that remind us to honor the forgotten. Reflect on James's journey. How can you stand up for someone overlooked in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't miss out. Subscribe now to Daily Narrated Stories. We're racing to 1,000 subscribers, and your support can make it happen today, ensuring you never miss another life-changing story like this one.